And you can have it all with your membership in the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce.
This is Strictly Business, presented by the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce. Sponsored in part by the law offices of Young Wooldridge, San Joaquin Community Hospital.
Welcome back to Strictly Business. I'm Nathan Ollie, Manager of Government Affairs at the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce. And joining me now is Robin Paggi, Training Coordinator with WorkLogicHR, and she's going to talk about age discrimination in the workplace. Good morning, Robin.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here. So, what is age discrimination? What are we talking about today?
It pertains to people who are 40 and older only,
Okay.
and it is when employers treat them differently, usually adversely. So refusing to hire them, firing them, refusing to promote them, simply because they're 40 or older.
Okay. What are some examples? You mentioned not hiring them. Is there something that an existing employee would see that would be considered age discrimination?
Well, being treated differently. So,
Okay.
for example, giving better assignments to younger employees, getting training to younger employees, and not giving it to older employees. And so besides not hiring them or firing them, treating them differently in those ways.
Okay. So now, obviously, there are some valid reasons for an employer to fire an older worker. What would some of those reasons be?
Well, they can't perform their job. And so that's one of the things that happens is that as people get older, especially when they are doing manual labor, they are expected to perform the same job to the same standards as younger employees. There are no accommodations for employees simply because they get older. And so if an employee cannot perform his or her job because age is slowing them down or has disabled them in some way, then those are reasons. Also, violating policies. So older employees have to adhere to the same performance standards as every other employee. There are no accommodations for them.
Okay. So age can be a disqualifying factor for certain jobs. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Is it possible to be turned down for a job because I'm, quote, overqualified?
Sure. I mean, employers don't have to hire people simply because they're qualified for a job. And if they feel they're going to hire somebody who has more than enough qualifications, who might end up leaving after a little while when something better opens up, then yes, those are valid employment reasons. However, that's one of the reasons that people often give for not hiring people who are over 40 is that they are overqualified. And that's a sneaky little way to not hire them. And so employers need to be very careful when they say that we don't want to hire this person because they're overqualified, because if they're over 40, that might look like age discrimination to that person.
Okay. And after the downturn in the economy over the past few years, there are a lot of older workers maybe in the workforce seeking a job who may have more advanced degrees or education than some of the employers are looking for.
That's right.
Okay.
And one of the things you mentioned, we've got a downturn in our economy in locally, and there are layoffs happening again in the oil industry. And employers in that industry, and any industry, need to be very careful when they're downsizing whom they choose to downsize. And so if they're laying off only older workers, people 40 and older, and not younger workers, then that is a great way for them to get an age discrimination claim against them. And that's happened frequently when employers lay off a group of employees because of their age. And the employer's excuse for it usually is that they're getting close to retirement, and so it's a good way to just help them out the door. But that's ripe for age discrimination claim.
Okay. Now, speaking of hiring and firing, is it possible can I be fired, or if I'm looking for a job, can I not be hired just because someone younger would cost the company less?
Well, that's a great way to get yourself sued for age discrimination.
Okay.
And that's what employers reason. And I had an employer tell me, I can hire two young guys for the same price that I'm paying this old guy. And so doesn't it make business sense to have the two instead of the one? Well, yes, it makes business sense, but it's also a great way to get yourself sued. And so employers need to be very careful when they are replacing older workers with younger workers, because that's where age discrimination claims come from.
Now, you mentioned retirement. and employers looking at pushing older workers, possibly closer to retirement. Can my employer, quote, make me retire?
There are some employers who can. For example, pilots, highway patrol officers. Even in some private businesses, there is a mandatory retirement age, and employers can get away with it in some circumstances. But in general, no, your employer cannot make you retire unless you cannot perform your job anymore.
Oh, okay. So if I'm a small business or even a large company for that matter, and I'm concerned about leaving myself open to an age discrimination suit, but I have to perform layoffs or something like that, what's my best recourse? How do I do it? Do I take the numbers, the age off? Where do I start?
Well, the best way to start is performance evaluations. And so that's one of the reasons to have performance evaluations on an annual basis. And that's one of the things that employers tend to do away with when they can't give raises to people, is to not evaluate their performance anymore. But when it comes to downsizing, you want that to be your first criteria. Who does a better job? And you begin to lay off people whose performance is not as good. And so that's a great way to demonstrate we are doing this through business necessity purposes and not based upon people's age.
Okay, and you mentioned annual performance reviews. We're getting a little off of age discrimination here, but you mentioned annual performance reviews. Is that something that can be done more frequently if perhaps I need to build a case for someone actually, or one employee versus another? Is it something that should be done more regularly?
It should be done regularly, because if you're doing it for the purposes of trying to get rid of somebody, and so you're doing an evaluation on them that is poor so that you can demonstrate you're trying to get rid of, or that you have valid reason to get rid of them, then that looks pretty sneaky and crafty.
Okay.
And so that's why annual done. But if there are going to be layoffs, to do evaluations for everybody across the board if you haven't done them for a while. And so that you do have that documentation to demonstrate you are making these decisions based upon valid criteria, not just based upon age.
Okay. So where can I find some more information about age discrimination and learn more about this?
The Department of Fair Employment and Housing is the state government that handles harassment and discrimination claims. And so they are a great resource. Also, the federal government, the EEOC. And so just jumping on their website, it can provide lots of information about age discrimination. They have PowerPoint presentations that are available, and all sorts of people who are available to answer questions in case employers have questions about what is age discrimination, can I do this, can I do that kind of thing.
Well, and that brings to mind my next question is, if, let's say I'm an employer and I am slapped with an age discrimination claim, what do I do? What's my recourse, and where do I go from there?
Well, hopefully, if you're an employer who gets a claim against you, you have a human resources professional who can help you through that situation, whether in-house or out-house, as it were. But what the claim requires, or what the government requires, is that you answer the claim. And so it's a lengthy process in which you have to demonstrate the reason you made your employment decisions. And so if you're refusing to hire somebody and they say, well, it's because of my age, the best documentation, or the best defense, is documentation, that you've got applications available, that you've got interview questions with notes on them, that type of thing, to demonstrate I did not discriminate against this person. So one of the things that HR people like me tell employers, document your employment decisions, because if you fail to do so and you have to demonstrate you did not discriminate, it's going to be very difficult without that documentation.
Okay. And last question, are there set penalties for age discrimination claims? Is it, if does the state or maybe the federal government have a set penalty for each instance of age discrimination, or is it just something that you could sue for $50 million for age discrimination?
Well, it depends upon who's doing your suing for
Okay.
you. So if the government sues on your behalf, the state or federal government, which they frequently don't, but if they do, there is a cap to how much they can recover. If an attorney sues on your behalf, the sky's the limit.
Oh, okay.
And age discrimination claims have been very costly. The most recent one that I read about was $18.5 million judgment against the employer. So they can be very costly.
Okay. Well, we want to make sure we do everything above the board so we don't run into those. So, Robin, Paggi, thanks very much for joining us this morning to talk about age discrimination and how people can protect themselves. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back with more Strictly Business right after this.